Oh, hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. here on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. I'm the newsman, Sam Sachs. It's the Friday show. Good morning to everyone, especially all the orca whales out there that have taken to attacking boats suddenly and appear to be teaching other orcas how to do the same. Not really sure what's going on there, and neither is anyone else, but I just wanted the whales to know that I've always been an ally. Big fan of the whales here. In fact, I plan to name my firstborn Moby Dick, which isn't easy, given that my last name is Sachs and all. All right, we begin with the Supreme Court, which continued its campaign to hollow out the U.S. regulatory state and give capital more free rein to pollute the nation's air and water. The case was Sackett versus the EPA, and in a 5-4 decision on Thursday, the High Court drastically restricted the types of wetlands that fall under Clean Water Act regulations. The consequence, according to Earth Justice, is that over 118 million acres of wetlands that had previously been protected from polluters are now vulnerable to exploitation and degradation. Quote, "The court's decision to deregulate wetlands will hurt everyone living in the United States," the group said. The majority opinion, written by Justice Alito and signed on to by Justices Thomas, Gorsuch, Coney Barrett, and Roberts, overturns a 2006 precedent that established that wetlands with a significant nexus to bodies of water like lakes and rivers are covered by the Clean Water Act, which prohibits the discharge of pollutants into navigable waters. Instead, the conservative majority ruled that wetlands have to have a continuous surface connection to larger bodies of water to qualify for regulation. The majority wrote, quote, "In sum, we hold that the Clean Water Act extends to only those wetlands with a continuous surface connection to bodies that are waters of the United States in their own right, so that they are indistinguishable from those waters." In effect, the ruling will make it much easier for property developers to dredge up wetlands for construction projects. As Justice Kagan made clear in her dissenting opinion, quote, "There is a thumb on the scale for property owners, no matter that the act, the one Congress enacted, is all about stopping property owners from polluting." The majority opinion is so far out of the realm of reasonable that even Justice Brett Kavanaugh joined the dissent against it. He wrote, quote, "By narrowing the act's coverage of wetlands to only adjoining wetlands, the court's new test will leave some long-regulated adjacent wetlands no longer covered by the Clean Water Act, with significant repercussions for water quality and flood control throughout the United States." Kavanaugh cited protections for wetlands near the Chesapeake Bay and Mississippi River that would disappear due to the court's decision. Last year, conservatives on the court restricted the EPA's authority to regulate carbon emissions from power plants too. So the court is quite literally on a campaign to make our air and water dirtier, because it will mean less hassle and paperwork for capitalists. In her dissent, Kagan repeated what she wrote after last year's ruling against the EPA. Quote, "The court substitutes its own ideas about policymaking for Congress's. The court will not allow the Clean Water Act to work as Congress instructed. The court, rather than Congress, will decide how much regulation is too much. That is not how I think our government should work. It is not how the Constitution thinks our government should work." Interesting point from Justice Kagan, but she failed to consider the opinions of all those ruling class donors to the court's conservative majority and how they think the government and Constitution should work. Next up, a judge in Washington just handed out the largest sentence yet to someone involved in the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol. Stuart Rhodes, the founder of the far-right militia group known as the Oath Keepers, was given an 18-year prison sentence after he was convicted of seditious conspiracy. Another Oath Keepers member, Kelly Meggs, was sentenced to 12 years. Evidence presented at trial showed the lengths Rhodes went to rally supporters to go to Washington on January 6th in an attempt to seize the Capitol in a bid to keep Donald Trump in the White House. Rhodes himself didn't enter the Capitol, but helped coordinate with dozens of other Oath Keepers who did. He also purchased $20,000 worth of arms in preparation for January 6th and kept a cache of weapons stored just outside Washington, D.C. that could be later used for a rapid response force. Prosecutors in the case sought a 25-year sentence for Rhodes, and while the 18-year sentence is hefty, and again, the longest one pertaining to the events at the Capitol, it's not the longest prison sentence related to January 6th. At a separate Stop the Steal rally in New York City, the very same day, anti-fascist activist Alex Stokes stabbed two Proud Boys in self-defense after they attacked a group of counter-demonstrators with a taser and a flagpole. The wounds were non-life-threatening. The Proud Boys who initiated the assault weren't charged, but Stokes was sentenced to 20 years in prison for it. 20 years. U.S. criminal justice system has always treated left-wing protesters differently than fascist ones, and this is the perfect example of that. For more info on Alex's case, go to freealexstokes.com. And finally, at the beginning of the week, mega bank JP Morgan Chase bragged to investors that its acquisition of failing First Republic Bank would lead to a net income boost of $3 billion this year. Well, fast forward now to the end of the week, and the bank is telling 1,000 people that they're going to get laid off. The workers were employed by First Republic Bank, and although JP Morgan is retaining some of the staff at the firm, the rest, roughly 1,000 people, were informed they're being laid off. JP Morgan currently employs nearly 300,000 people, so the extra 1,000 employees from First Republic would have accounted for like 0.003% of JP Morgan's workforce. It would have been pocket change to retain them, especially for a bank that, again, was just bragging a few days ago about how it got $3 billion richer. JP Morgan said in a statement, quote, "Since our acquisition of First Republic on May 1st, we've been transparent with their employees and kept our promise to update them on their employment status within 30 days. We recognize that they have been under stress and uncertainty since March and hope that today will bring clarity and closure." Well, they probably would have preferred to have their jobs, but clarity and closure are good too, I guess. The New York Times reported that White House and Republican congressional negotiators are nearing a debt limit deal, one that includes cuts to domestic spending programs and limits the IRS's ability to go after rich tax evaders. The agreement is far from finalized, but the paper reported on the outlines of it, which include a 2-year spending freeze on domestic programs, paired with a boost in the military budget. In exchange, the debt limit would be raised for 2 years, after which conservatives will again be able to use the ceiling to enact more austerity. In an effort to protect domestic programs from even deeper spending cuts, the administration is agreeing to claw back some of the $80 billion in extra funding that went to the IRS as part of last year's Inflation Reduction Act. The fact that Republicans want to get rid of that investment proves they don't actually care about deficit reduction, but they do care about protecting their rich donors. The added money for the IRS is projected to actually reduce the deficit by boosting tax revenues. Getting rid of it will only protect high earners who rarely face audit, partly because the IRS is underfunded. Also, the looming IRS cuts come just as it was reported that the agency is working on a free filing system for taxpayers, which would disrupt the for-profit tax filing industry. Times also reported that the agreement could include new work requirements on some social welfare programs and fossil fuel industry-friendly permitting reform, though the details of those measures are still not finalized. All of this, again, to increase the debt limit for 2 years. Just 2 years. Democrats are getting nothing else in return. Well, I shouldn't say that since some of them do actually want spending cuts. But what's funny here, and not in a ha ha way, but in a I'm going to walk into traffic sort of way, is that it will likely require a majority of Democrats to vote for this shitty deal to get it passed. Republicans that want far more severe spending cuts are going to revolt against a deal like this. So Speaker McCarthy will have to rely on Biden and Democratic leadership in Congress to deliver the votes. The sales pitch being, hey, it could have been a lot worse. And while that is true, it could have been worse, it also never needed to come to this. Biden has a number of options at his disposal to diffuse the debt limit crisis without speaking one word to Kevin McCarthy and without cutting one dime from non-defense spending programs. But instead, we entered into the usual cycle on Capitol Hill. Republicans propose extremist austerity, Democrats negotiate it down to mild austerity, and then declare a win. Already, the Beltway press is spinning it that way. Check out this tweet from Semaphore's Washington editor, Jordan Weissman. Quote, if the deal ends up being this, plus tweaking work requirements on TANF, plus something that modestly boosts oil and gas, gonna have to be some reassessment here about whether Biden's strategy was really so bad. Yeah, after spending weeks watching Biden get rinsed in negotiations he didn't need to enter in the first place, hey, this guy's pretty savvy. Well, it's time for Rich Dicks. Thanks for the nominations on social media. Rona and Michael coming through with the standing nomination for all the goddamn landlords. Thank you for that one, friends. Here's a nomination for Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who this month signed into law legislation that expands child labor in the state. Very cool stuff. Got a nomination here for Elon Musk, of course, after that disastrous Twitter Spaces event with Nazi meatball Ron DeSantis. Also, there's news that Musk's brain chip has been approved for human trials. Hopefully, all his weird reply guys on Twitter sign up to do it. A lot of monkeys died during the previous experiments. DeSantis himself also nominated this week. And we also got some nominations for prior Rich Dick David Zaslav, the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, who's so bad at his job that he might single-handedly provoke a strike, not just by the writers, but also the directors and actors, too. Impressive stuff, Zaz. Again, thanks for the nominations, but in the end, this week's Rich Dick is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Okay, sure, he's not that rich, he's not a capitalist or anything, and among governors in the country, his salary is in the bottom half. But he's richer than I am, and he lives in a governor's mansion, so we'll allow it. And he's a dick because on Thursday, he sided with companies like Uber in the class struggle against their drivers. Walz vetoed a bill that would have established a minimum wage for rideshare drivers. He commissioned a study instead to look into the issue more, a working group, if you will, of drivers, riders, companies, the disability community, and labor. In other words, he wants the issue to go away. The old create a commission trick. Look, state lawmakers already worked on this issue extensively. The bill was introduced by State Senator Omar Fateh. It was referred to committee, considered, rewritten, passed out of committee, put on the floor, challenged, debated, amended, and then finally passed by a majority of state House members. Then it was referred to the Senate, and the process was repeated. And during all of this, the bill was significantly weakened to address rideshare companies' concerns. The proposed minimum wage was slashed in half. Requirements that companies provide insurance and cover the costs of gas and vehicle maintenance were stripped out of it. The issue has been thoroughly studied, and a lot of legislative work has already gone into this. And all of it, including those scenes of State Senator Fateh getting hoisted up like he's Rudy Rudiger by rideshare drivers after the bill passed, all of it now erased by Waltz because he got scared of Uber. And that's the most generous interpretation. The company claimed it would stop operating in the state outside the Twin Cities if Waltz signed the bill, so he didn't sign it, even though Uber made similar threats in Washington State and New York City after their governments passed new minimum wage laws for rideshare drivers. The company is still operating in those areas. Corporations can only hold cities and states hostage like this to the extent that elected representatives let them. Minnesota state lawmakers did their job, but Governor Tim Waltz is a coward. This, by the way, is the second time Waltz has moved to screw workers this month. He also came out on the side of Mayo Clinic, which wanted its nurses exempted from a proposed Minnesota law that gives nursing staff more influence in staffing decisions at hospitals. The nurses' union blasted Waltz's decision. But screwing over workers is becoming a habit for the Minnesota governor, which is why Tim Waltz is this week's Rich Dick. All right, friends, the show ends this morning with a sunrise from Alaska. It was sent in by Charlie in Anchorage on Dena'ina land. It's a good one. Enjoy. Thank you, Charlie. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please sign up to Means TV if you haven't yet. There's a 7-day free trial going on right now. Also, subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels. Look, one day capitalism's gonna fall. I promise. But until then, we're gonna be right here. See you next week.